Hi, my name is Athena, and part of my job involves interacting and having a conversation with my inspirations. So, back when I started Carpe Bloom, I always knew that we would be collaborating with people who really inspired me personally and who inspired other people on the team. One thing that happens when you're in the same room as someone who you've been inspired by for ages is that you get nervous. And that is something that many people that I've worked with have faced. So whenever they go in for an interview, they get scared. And that is completely natural. That is something that I find abnormal if you aren't scared or if you don't feel that little bit of anxiety like, oh my god, I'm going to literally meet my favorite DJ right now. What am I going to do? Am I just going to fall off stage? You get what I mean? Not a true story at all. Like, I have not fallen headfirst into the sand and tripped over my shoes just because I liked someone. That is not a true story. Yeah. So in order to really just get over this hurdle or to just get over this little mountain of nervousness in interviewing artists, I've created a sort of guide for some of my team members, and it's been tried and tested and it worked out quite well. So I thought I'd share this with you. So this is actually the part where we talk about crafting questions, less of the interactional bit. This is more about the really the technicalities of it. And I think that that is one of the most useful things or the most necessary things to prepare for, because when you've done your research, when you know your shit, that is, you're gonna go in there with your head held high that you're worthy of a seat next to this person because you've done your research and you're here to respect that person, honor that person, appreciate their work, and ask them questions about their journey, which you're super excited about and have been invested in because you did your research. I don't know how many times I said research, but basically you get the idea. It's super important to do research. The first thing that you've got to do when you craft out these questions is that you've always got to think of the 5 W's, 1 H. So that's the who, what, when, why, how, things like that. And I feel that it's really basic, but it's very important because when it comes to profiling someone else, which you're likely to do if it's an artist interview, you're going to want to know sort of timelines, maybe when they started getting into this passion or when they started, really branching out and switching to a different sound, things like that. You also kind of want to know how they personally think of themselves, the image that they want to project. At least that is the message for us because we want to share their perspective, and it's not fair if we just misconstrue who they are because we think of them in a certain way and they don't. That's actually one of the points of an interview, is to know them also from their own point of view, to know their likes, their dislikes, the kind of things that they might want to do on a daily or the kind of advice that they would give, and from what position, from their position. So that's why I say that we always need to address the most basic 5 W's, 1 H. But I understand that addressing this 5 W's, 1 H in questions may kind of be weird, because what if you ask, who are you? And then later on you ask, how did you get started? There's bound to be elements of overlap. And when that happens, when you ask those questions in succession or even with another question in between, it seems really redundant and it doesn't seem like you're maximizing the interview time. So what I always like to say is that we do this thing called embed. So we craft up a preamble and we embed the 5W1H trigger within the question itself, within the preamble. I could ask, how do you get started? And then later on, I could follow it up with, but why did you get started? But you could also do it in a preamble and embedding sort of way. So ask instead, I think it's pretty cool how you switched from engineering to music production within a span of 5 years, because that's what a lot of people I really respected, your big shift. So how did that come about? Could you tell us about your, the reason that motivated you to branch out into a different area of study? So when you ask it like that, you're able to contextualize for them. But not only that, you also ensure that they are given the airtime to explain who they are, that you're touching on a little different, a part of their history, which is like engineering maybe, that they wouldn't, that they know that you're interested in that sort of unrelated part of their music career. maybe it's about engineering, right? And you're able to ask them about their full story and get a fuller picture from their perspective. So when you ask it like that, not only does it segue nicely into a more personal answer, but it also makes it less awkward and maximizes the time that you have in the interview room. Sometimes you're only allowed to submit, 5 questions instead of like 10 questions, and you have to collapse some questions, but you can't skimp on material of the answers either. So in order to really get an informed and reflective response, do it in a way where it's a natural sort of, you have read up about them on this thing and you're going to ask them on this thing, using that prior knowledge as a springboard. So that actually brings me to my next point, and this is going to touch a bit on how you act and how you behave. So many a times we've gone into interviews where we expect it to be just yourself and the other person, but there ends up being like security, and there ends up being maybe their PR, and it just gets really daunting. Like, you're not the star, but all of these people, they be treating you like you are, because you have to get through security, and maybe they have to stamp on you something, and you're led to the trailer park, and there's just 5 million people that are there, that's on their side, and you're just a little bit confronted, just a little bit scared, because you now have to sit down, and maybe your photographer is just taking photos away of you, and you force yourself to lead in first. And to me, that can get pretty scary, even though I really love a good conversation. It's just, there's a lot of pressure. I understand that this mounting pressure may actually cause you to forget a few different things. So I like to do a little trick. So what I like to do is, when I do the research, firstly, I'll really invest myself into listening to a lot of what they've produced or watching a lot of what they've done. I feel that it's only respectful to also know the type of person, what they do, what their passions are when it comes to interviewing them, because I mean, you've booked them, and it's really an amazing thing, an amazing opportunity to be able to sit across from them. But beyond that, by doing this in-depth research and really molding yourself to maybe their sound, it actually puts you in that position of preparedness. And when you go in, even though you're nervous, you'll have that, maybe their top 3 songs that they produced in your head, and you're able to start in by complimenting them. Like, oh my gosh, I really loved these 3 tracks that you created. I love your sound, but it just unifies and comes out so much in those particular 3 tracks. Could you actually tell me how you got your career started, when you were young? So basically, you're able to lead in. So a trick that I like to do, and what I tell my Carpe writers to do, is that we always go in with 3 songs or 3 performances or 3 books that they've written. So when you go in, you're able to reflect immediately on those 3 references. It's like writing a paper. It's like you gotta have 3 citations at least on hand that you can refer to throughout the first part of the interview. So the next tip that I have is to always create links between questions. Now, I know that this may seem really contradictory, because I usually don't advise people to stick to the script when it comes to interviews. I feel that it should just flow like a natural conversation. If you've done your research, you'll know what to say next. But the thing is, there are some points at which you need to leverage off questions that you've already asked. And this will help regardless of whether you follow the script or not, because you can't plan for their answers. So by practicing these sort of links and creating these sort of links when you craft out the question, it ensures that even if they answer in a different way and it just throws you completely off, you're able to link back to that last question and bring in the direction or refine the scope of this entire interview. So let me tell you an example of a linked up question. So let's say my first question is, Bound by Nothing sounds like such a limitless EP. The title of it already highlights how you boys are really venturing out without any restrictions whatsoever. Could you tell us about the main message that you want to convey behind your new music? And after they provide you a really lovely answer on, for our case, it was basically on how music could really empower them and uplift them to do anything that they really desired to do, that anyone could do it, anyone's lives could be touched by music and changed by music. Thank you for our interview. But basically, after they answer that, and let's say you want to transition to something else, to ask them more about their own personal lives, about each of their stakes within the album itself. But how are you going to ask that? Because they've just given you this immensely lofty message about their music and about how every single person can be touched by music and impacted. How are you going to transition to why do you specifically believe that music is your tool, when they've just said that music can impact everyone else? So that's when you depend on the previous question that you just asked. So keep in mind that the crux of our first question was the fact that their EP was entitled Bound by Nothing. So make your next question springboard from that title. So what our next question was when we were faced with this situation was that we asked, so Bound by Nothing, as we mentioned before, it just sounds like such a limitless album and a music masterpiece, and we understand that you guys all have different skill sets when it comes to production, to design, to rapping, to dancing, to performing, and that itself reflects the limitless nature of being bound by nothing. Your skill sets just transcend because you're able to do everything from production to performing yourself. So what were each of your favorite parts of producing this album? So we've leveraged upon the same concept that there is a sense of limitless and lack of restrictions when it comes to their music, but we've then transformed it into a different question by embedding the idea of how instead of embedding the idea of why. The first question was about why they named it as such, what their message was going to be. So why and what. But the next one is about who and how, when we've asked what are each of their stakes and what are each of their most memorable parts of producing this album. Yep, so those are just my top 3 artist tips for now for crafting out questions in an interview. Yeah, for real, thank you so much to all the amazing people who we've managed to really work with and have a conversation with because of the work that we do. It's something that really heartens our hearts to really see all of these amazing creative professionals and industry inspirations just give that advice to young people to really inspire them and push them to pursue their passions. I think that that's the power of human connection. When you connect with someone else on the level of giving advice or sharing a story or sharing a passion and a dream, damn, that is just best kind of connection and the kind of connection that I really aspire to forge. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to this really short guide.